I believe there are monsters born in the world to human parents. Some you can see, misshapen and horrible, with huge heads or tiny bodies. Some are born with no arms, no legs. Some with 3 arms, some with tails or mouths in odd places. They are accidents and no one's fault, as used to be thought. Once they were considered the visible punishments for concealed sins. And just as there are physical monsters, can there not be mental or psychic monsters born? The face and body may be perfect, but if a twisted gene or a malformed egg can produce physical monsters, may not the same process produce a malformed soul?
Cathy's hair was golden lovely. Her ears were small flaps which sealed against her head. Her body was a boy's body, narrow-hipped, straight-legged. Her feet were round and stubby, almost like hooves.
She made people uneasy, but not so that they wanted to get away from her. At a young age, she used lies and sexuality as tools to control and manipulate. She was a monster. Cathy didn't speak for a long time after the incident. Mrs. Ames wanted blood and she got it. Both of the boys were whipped within an inch of their lives by their fathers and sent to a house of correction. The boys and girls her age only grew more fascinated with her. She held a strange power over those around her, even her own mother.
James Grew was the Latin teacher at Cathy's high school. There was a time when he seemed consumed by a singular mission. He walked on his toes and sang to himself. A fire had been lit deep inside him. And then, just as quickly, the fire went out. He grew haggard. He was often seen in the church at night, praying feverishly. And then, one night, he visited the Ames' house.
I've got to talk to you.
It's after midnight.
Come put some clothes on and come outside.
Young man, you are either drunk or sick. Go home and get some sleep.
I've got to talk to you.
The next morning, James Grew was found with half his head blown off by a shotgun, kneeling in front of the altar. Suicide? But over what? No one knew. Darling, that young man at our door last night, are you sure it wasn't James Grew?
Nope. He didn't look anything like him.
No need to snap at me. Cathy, he was your teacher. Did he ever seem sad?
Well, he looks sad sometimes. Sometimes sick. I heard he was having trouble in Boston. We all liked him.
And from there on, everyone knew. James Grew had fallen into trouble in Boston. No one gave a second thought to Cathy.
After her 16th birthday, a change came over Cathy. She grew cold, apathetic. She refused to go to school, and her mother was fearful enough to not force her to. Mr. Ames gave her a stern lecture with a pervading but empty tone of threat. Cathy saw his weakness and agreed without protest. The next morning she was gone. Her bed was neatly made, and all her possessions were gone. Mr. Ames acted coolly and brought her back from Boston, where she had escaped to before the day was through.
Mr. Ames whipped Cathy with a rage she had never felt before. Cathy was cunning, though. She screamed, cried, begged, and pleaded her way into a lesser beating. After the beating, Cathy was a changed person. She was charming and polite around her parents, always. She worked hard at school. Beginning, it seemed to help to plan for the future. She helped with household duties more than was asked for her. She oiled the hinges of all the doors. She kept the lamps always filled with kerosene. She stuffed papers around the foundation to block cold drafts. To her parents, it seemed as if her coldness was just a passing phase. Honey, I have to go to the altar guild. Your father wondered if you would go to the bank and pick up money for the payroll and take it to the tannery.
Well, I'd like to.
What's on your mind, George?
There were no keys in the locks.
Maybe they melted.
The locks didn't melt.
Try as they might, neither George nor the coroner could solve the mystery of the missing keys. It wasn't until a break-in at the tannery was discovered, safe opened, windows broken, that their suspicions were confirmed. The fire was no accident. Fear erupted when a large quantity of blood was found in the carriage house, along with Cathy's hair ribbon. From there, everyone who didn't live in the community was instantly a suspect. Eventually, a bumbling vagrant was brought in who confessed to everything put towards him. It wasn't until the actual case that everyone came to their senses. Look here, Mike. You shouldn't be doing stuff like this. You could get this man hanged.
He said he did it.
He'd say he did anything. The law is designed to save, not to destroy. Eventually, the fervent mood of the townspeople died down. In a few months, people remembered how little evidence there had actually been. It also occurred to think that, without a body, there was no guarantee that Cathy had been murdered. Mr. Edwards carried on his business of whoremaster in an orderly and unemotional way. He was better than well fixed. He was rich, and in the matter of his death was in itself symbolic of success and well-being. Now and then a smart girl came into the profession, but she usually moved up to better things. He did not want pretty girls either. I don't know how Cathy Ames heard about Esther Edwards. She was too far pretty for his business. I can't understand why someone like you...
My father's dead. Before he died, he let things go to ruins. We didn't know that he had borrowed money from the bank, and I can't let the bank take the money away from my mother. The shock would kill her.
If ever Mr. Edwards had the chance, it was now. And indeed, a little warning buzz did sound in his brain, but it was not loud enough. Well now, my dear, there must be some way for you to get this interest money.
And this to a girl who had simply asked for a job as a whore. Or had she?
Miss Edwards was persistently, if not profoundly, religious. Her husband had always been to her a cold, thoughtful man who made few and doubtful physical demands on her. When her husband's disposition began to disintegrate, she ascribed it to his stomach and then to his business. If in all the years Mr. Edwards had heard about anyone like himself, he would have laughed, for Mr. Edwards was a cold-blooded whoremaster, as ever, and lived and fell hopelessly in love with Catherine Amesbury. Mr. Edwards had never experienced such misery. He had to trust her, and at the same time he did not trust her. He tried to buy her loyalty with presents and money. It was the first experience with his love, and it nearly killed him. One thing Mr. Edwards did not know, and could not know, because Catherine wouldn't permit it, is that she was faithful to him. Once she had him, which was very soon, she managed to always seem slightly dissatisfied. In their sexual relations, she convinced him that the result was not quite satisfactory yet to her. She saw with satisfaction his nerves begin to go, his hands take to quivering, his loss of weight, and the wild glazed looks in his eyes should convince him.
Catherine wanted money, and she set about getting it as quickly and easily as she could. When Edwards was at his weakest point, she went through his pockets and took any large bills she could find. However, he didn't accuse her in fear she would run away. One evening, his key didn't fit in the lock of the front door. Only after relentless pounding, she answered the door. She changed the keys because she lost her own and was afraid of living alone. She promised to get him another key but never did. Edwards was a simple man, but even simple men have dark qualities. Mr. Edwards had stocked a little nest with champagne. Catherine refused to touch it.
It makes me sick. I've tried it and cannot drink it.
Nonsense. Just have one glass. It won't hurt you.
No, thank you. I cannot drink it.
Edwards thought of her reluctance as a delicate, ladylike quality. He thought wine might loosen her tongue.
It's not very friendly of you to have no glasses with me.
I tell you, it doesn't agree with me.
This is silly. Do you want me to be angry with you?
I don't want it. You don't know. It's not good for me.
Drink it.
I didn't want to do it. Remember that.
Maybe you better not have any more.
It doesn't matter now.
It's nice to have a glass or so.
What do you know about me? You wonder where a nice girl like me learned tricks? I've worked in cribs. I've worked in places you've never even heard of.
You don't know what you're saying.
You thought I would talk? Well, I'm talking.
One day, a clipping came in from the agency he employed. It was an old newspaper account of a fire from a small-town weekly.
Oh, Mr. Edwards, what a shame. I have to go out now. Wait. What are you doing? Hey, that's mine.
I know.
What are you up to?
I thought we'd go for a little trip. Small town in Connecticut.
I don't want to work now. You can't make me. I'll call the police.
Had a big fire there 7 years ago. Do you remember that?
What do you want me to do?
Just come for a little trip with me. Said you wanted to work.
She could think of only one plan. She put a thin-bladed knife in her purse. She must go along with him and wait for a chance. A man couldn't always watch. In the small town, they got off the train at dusk. Edwards thought he knew what he intended to do. Whip her and put her in one of his rooms at the inn, and then continue that cycle. Then he would throw her out. The knife didn't bother him. He already knew about that. The first thing he did when they stopped was to jerk the purse from her hand and throw it over the wall. That took care of the knife. But he didn't know about himself. After 2 slashes, the quirt was not enough. Then his fists were not enough. His frantic hand found a stone on the ground, and his cold control burst through. Later he looked down at her beaten face. 2 thoughts ran through his mind. Bury her, or cry like a child. That he had not killed Catherine was an accident. Every blow had been intended to crush her. Wanting to live forced her to drag herself along the dark road, looking for help. She turned in at a gate, and almost made it to the steps of the house, before fainting.